The woman sat quietly in her window seat, her eyes observing the billowing white clouds outside. Her appearance was so ordinary that no one paid her any attention, just another passenger on a flight from New York to Miami. But beneath that unassuming exterior lay a dangerous secret. She was on a mission where failure would mean everything falling apart. Everything began uneventfully until a woman in first class, elegant yet arrogant, started causing trouble. Loud accusations rang out, unjustly criticizing and humiliating her in front of the entire cabin. Most of the passengers remained silent, avoiding eye contact. While tension spread like a small spark growing into a fire, she kept calm, trying not to reveal her true identity. But deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation on the plane wasn't just about the arrogance of a stranger, it was a harbinger of the greater challenges awaiting her in Miami. A dangerous crime boss, a complex money laundering network, and people who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect their secrets. The question wasn't whether she could survive this flight. The question was, when the plane landed, would she have the strength to face the real storm awaiting her? The calm yet firm voice of the flight attendant echoed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. The flight from Chicago to Miami will be departing in a few minutes." Elena Cruz, 32, sat quietly near the emergency exit in the economy cabin. She checked the small backpack tucked under her seat, making sure all her critical documents were secure. As an FBI agent, Elena was no stranger to last-minute assignments, but this flight was especially critical. She was heading to Miami to attend a confidential meeting regarding an international money laundering case she had been tracking for months. Elena dressed simply to avoid attention: a gray t-shirt, black jeans, and white sneakers. With her long black hair tied neatly back, she blended seamlessly into the crowd, looking like any other woman traveling for work. But her sharp eyes missed nothing, a habit of a trained agent, always ready for the unexpected. The Boeing 737 was packed with passengers, ranging from busy professionals to families on vacation. While most were busy relaxing or organizing their luggage, Elena's focus was drawn to a woman seated in first class. Her name was Linda Worthington. The 58-year-old exuded wealth and authority. A sleek black dress hugged her figure, gold jewelry gleamed against her pale skin, and an expensive handbag rested carefully on the seat next to her. But more than her appearance, it was her attitude that caught attention. From the moment she boarded the plane, Linda had been causing a scene. "I specifically asked for Evian water, not this cheap bottled stuff," she snapped at a flight attendant, her eyes filled with irritation. Elena sighed quietly, trying to ignore the commotion. She slipped on her headphones, turned on some soft music, and pulled out a confidential file to review the keynotes for her upcoming mission. But she quickly realized that the tension Linda was stirring up wasn't something easily overlooked. As the plane taxied down the runway, Linda continued to complain about her seat. "This chair is as hard as a rock. I paid for first class. I deserve better service than this." Some passengers seated nearby purposely turned away, avoiding eye contact with her. Linda, however, didn't care. She began glancing back toward the economy cabin, her eyes scanning each passenger with a critical, judgmental gaze. Finally, her eyes landed on Elena. Elena didn't look up, but she could feel the cold, disdainful stare boring into her. Linda muttered something under her breath, quiet enough to sound like she was talking to herself, but loud enough for Elena and those nearby to hear. "I can't believe people like that are allowed on planes." Elena raised her head and met Linda's gaze. But instead of responding, she returned her focus to her file. She had seen looks like that too many times before. Growing up in a Cuban immigrant family, prejudice was nothing new to her. Still, she hadn't expected to face it on a flight in 2023. A few minutes after the plane reached cruising altitude, a young flight attendant accidentally spilled a bit of juice on Linda's tray table. "Do you know this is first class?" Linda shouted. "Do you think your pathetic little apology is enough? Who trained you to work like this?" The flight attendant repeatedly apologized, her head bowed, but Linda wouldn't let it go. She berated the service, scolding the young woman until she looked like she was on the verge of tears. Elena glanced over, wondering if Linda realized she was making the entire cabin uncomfortable. A senior flight attendant quickly came over to assist, wiping the tray table and bringing Linda a fresh glass of juice. But instead of showing gratitude, Linda rolled her eyes and said haughtily, "This is exactly why I prefer flying private." The incident ended, but the atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier. Linda turned her attention back to Elena. She started talking to the man seated next to her, loud enough for those around her to hear. Just look at her, Linda said, tilting her head in Alina's direction. Who lets people like that on planes? It's not safe at all. The man seated next to Linda looked visibly uncomfortable but said nothing. Each word from Linda felt like a dagger to Alina. She tried to focus on her file, but her mind was racing with the question, should I stay silent or stand up to her? Part of her wanted to respond to Linda, but her FBI training had taught her to control her emotions. She couldn't let Linda drag her down to her level. Alina closed her eyes and took a deep, calming breath. She didn't know this was only the beginning. Linda continued her muttered remarks, even criticizing the flight crew for not properly screening suspicious-looking people like her. A few passengers nearby began whispering among themselves, while others gave Alina sympathetic glances. The plane remained steady in the sky, but the atmosphere inside was becoming increasingly stifling. Alina turned to the window, trying to maintain her composure. She knew that even if she stayed silent, the storm Linda was stirring would rage on. But she also knew one thing for sure: the truth would always prevail. Alina sat quietly, trying to ignore the commotion coming from first class. Linda Worthington's voice rang out steadily, complaining about everything from the seat she was in to the airplane food. Passengers nearby were beginning to look visibly exhausted, some even attempting to drown out the noise with headphones in a desperate effort to reduce the discomfort. But Linda didn't stop at harassing the flight attendants. Her attention shifted toward other passengers, and her scrutinizing gaze landed on Alina once more. She muttered something under her breath, but this time loud enough for those seated nearby to hear. People like her always look suspicious. You never know what they're hiding. Alina heard every word clearly. She clenched her jaw, feeling a surge of anger rise in her chest. However, she kept her face neutral, refusing to let any emotion show. She was no stranger to moments like these: the prejudice, the disdainful stares. But this time it felt different. Perhaps it was because Linda wasn't just insulting her, but was deliberately trying to rally others into her line of thinking. Linda, far from stopping, turned to the man sitting next to her, clearly fishing for agreement. Don't you think so? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. She looks so suspicious. You never know what people like that are capable of. The middle-aged man sitting next to Linda glanced at her, his face showing clear discomfort. He shrugged and gave a non-committal response, seemingly just to appease her. I don't think there's much to worry about. But that didn't satisfy Linda. She turned her gaze back to Alina, her eyes filled with disdain. There's definitely something off about her, Linda muttered. Look at the way she's dressed, the way she's sitting. Who knows? Alina felt her blood boiling. What is wrong with her, she thought. Just because I'm not sitting in first class, she thinks she has the right to judge me. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain control. She had been trained to stay calm in tense situations, and she knew that reacting to Linda would only escalate things further. But Linda didn't stop. She pressed the call button for a flight attendant, demanding immediate attention. A young flight attendant arrived, her professional smile firmly in place. Ma'am, how can I help you? Linda pointed directly at Alina. Do you see her? I don't feel safe with someone like her on this plane. Have you checked her papers? Who knows what she's hiding? Linda's words rang out clearly through the cabin, causing some nearby passengers to turn and look. A few people began whispering, while others tried to ignore the situation, not wanting to get involved in any trouble. Alina lifted her head, her eyes meeting Linda's directly. But instead of saying anything, she turned her gaze back to the window, pretending not to care. She knew Linda was only trying to provoke her. The head flight attendant quickly stepped in to handle the situation. She looked at Linda with a calm expression, but her tone was firm. Ma'am, all passengers on this flight have been thoroughly screened by security before boarding. Please rest assured and return to your seat. Linda crossed her arms over her chest, her face flushed with anger. That's not the answer I want to hear. She looks suspicious, and I don't think you're doing your job properly. The head flight attendant kept her tone steady. Ma'am, we do not have the authority to check passengers' documents after they have passed through airport security. Please return to your seat and remain calm so the flight can proceed smoothly. Linda opened her mouth to argue, but a few passengers were already beginning to show their frustration with her. A young woman sitting nearby, unable to hold back any longer, turned to Linda and said, "Can you stop bothering everyone? People just want to have a peaceful flight." Linda glared at the young woman, her voice sharp as a knife. Who do you think you are to talk to me like that? I'm trying to protect everyone on this flight. The young woman shook her head, clearly unwilling to continue the argument. But her words had sparked silent agreement among some of the other passengers. A man in a nearby row muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous. Why can't she just sit down and be quiet?" Linda begrudgingly returned to her seat, but the anger on her face was unmistakable. She muttered something under her breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Unbelievable. Everyone is blind. She's clearly a threat." Elena remained silent, but she could feel her patience wearing thin. She knew Linda wasn't the type to stop easily. The entire cabin fell into a state of quiet tension. Passengers tried to return to their own activities, but their eyes occasionally darted toward Elena and Linda. Soft murmurs spread through the space, creating an oppressive atmosphere. Elena closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. "She's not worth it," Elena told herself. "I'm here for my mission. Focus on what's important." But deep down, Elena knew this was only the beginning. Linda wasn't the kind of person to let things go, and if this continued, a real storm was bound to erupt. The atmosphere in the cabin grew even more stifling after Linda's sarcastic remarks. Elena sat still, revealing no emotion, but inside she could feel the tension building with every passing moment. Linda was not the kind of person to back down easily. She continued to glare at Elena, as if searching for more evidence to support her accusations. Elena maintained her composure, her gaze fixed on the window, but she knew this was far from over. While the seatbelt sign remained illuminated, Linda suddenly unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and marched toward the lead flight attendant, who was working at the front of the cabin. "Excuse me," Linda called out loudly, her voice echoing through the cabin. The lead flight attendant, still composed, turned to face Linda. "Ma'am, the plane is in motion. Please return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt." Linda ignored the request and instead pointed toward Elena, her voice rising, sharp and accusatory. "I told you already. She's not safe. I want you to check her documents right now. Who knows what she's carrying?" The entire cabin fell silent. Every passenger turned to look at Elena, their gazes filled with curiosity and confusion. Elena could feel all the attention focused on her. A few passengers began whispering among themselves. An older man leaned toward his wife and murmured, "What's going on? That girl doesn't look suspicious at all." The lead flight attendant stepped closer to Linda, her tone growing firmer. "Ma'am, as I've explained, all passengers on this flight have already passed through security screening. Please return to your seat immediately, or we will be forced to report your behavior." Linda didn't back down. Instead, she crossed her arms, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Report me? Do you even know who I am? I've flown hundreds of times and I know when something isn't right. She's a threat, and you need to do something before it's too late." Linda's words made the tension in the cabin reach a breaking point. A few passengers started looking at Elena with wary expressions, as if Linda's accusations had planted seeds of doubt in their minds. For the first time, Elena decided to speak. She removed her headphones, stood up slowly, and addressed Linda with a calm but commanding voice. "Mom," Elena said, her eyes locking directly with Linda's, her voice carrying clearly across the cabin. "I haven't done anything wrong. You are judging me solely based on my appearance. And that's not okay." Linda turned to face her, her eyes flashing with anger as she confronted Elena. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she snapped. "Who do you think you are?" Elena held her gaze, unflinching and unwavering. "I don't need to explain who I am to you. But you have no right to harass me or any other passenger on this flight." As the tension in the cabin reached its peak, the captain stepped out of the cockpit. He was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, but his expression clearly showed that he was annoyed by the commotion. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady yet commanding. Linda immediately turned to the captain, as though she had just found her ally. "What's going on?" "I'm trying to protect everyone on this flight," she exclaimed loudly. "That woman over there is a threat. I demand you check her immediately." The captain looked at Linda, then at Elena, and back to Linda again, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. "Ma'am," he said to Linda in a measured tone, "we have no reason to suspect any passenger on this flight. Please return to your seat and allow us to complete this journey safely." But Linda wasn't backing down. She pointed at Elena again, her voice nearly a shout. "Are you seriously ignoring me? Can't you see how she looks? She could be hiding something dangerous." The captain sighed, clearly losing patience. He turned to the lead flight attendant and said, "If she continues to cause a disturbance, Notify airport security as soon as we land. Those words made Linda pause. She glanced around the cabin and realized no one was supporting her. But instead of sitting down quietly, she crossed her arms, her face set in a smug expression. Fine. Call security. I'm just trying to protect everyone. When the truth comes out, I won't be surprised if she's arrested right at the gate. Linda reluctantly returned to her seat, but she didn't stop muttering under her breath. Elena sat back down, but she could still feel Linda's piercing gaze fixed on her. The cabin descended into tense silence. Passengers nearby glanced at Elena with mixed reactions, some sympathetic, some cautious, and others simply curious. Elena took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger simmering inside her. I can't let her ruin this flight. Let the truth speak for itself, she thought, but deep down Elena knew this wasn't over. Linda wasn't the type to let things go easily. The atmosphere in the cabin remained heavy after the tense confrontation between Linda and Elena. Linda's baseless accusations, though irrational, had left some passengers unsettled. A few furtive glances were cast toward Elena, while most passengers deliberately looked away, unwilling to get involved in the awkward situation. Elena sat silently, her gaze fixed on the window. She knew that responding further would only make things worse. Linda wasn't the type to back down, and it was clear she still had plenty more to say. Still, Elena also knew that her patience wouldn't last forever. She sighed and reminded herself, focus on the mission. This is just a passing storm. But this passing storm was about to turn into a full-blown hurricane. Things remained quiet for a moment. But Linda couldn't stay still. She turned to the man sitting next to her, the same man who had been avoiding eye contact with her throughout the earlier confrontation. Do you see that? Linda whispered, loud enough for Elena and others nearby to hear. She's too quiet. That's what's suspicious. People like her always know how to hide their intentions. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly trying to distance himself from the conversation. But Linda either didn't notice or didn't care. She continued speaking, her voice growing louder with each word. We have no idea what she's capable of. It's so stupid for everyone to just sit here and pretend nothing's wrong. A young woman sitting in the opposite row finally had enough. She pulled off her headphones and turned to Linda. Can you stop talking nonsense? You're making everyone uncomfortable. Linda spun around, her eyes blazing with anger. What did you just say? I'm trying to protect everyone. Can't you see the danger right in front of you? The young woman shook her head and let out a dry laugh. Danger? The only danger here is you. The young woman's response nearly made Linda explode. She shot up from her seat, ignoring the illuminated seatbelt sign, and marched down the aisle straight toward the lead flight attendant. The announcement from the cockpit echoed through the cabin speakers, signaling that the flight was about to land. Ladies and gentlemen, please check that your seatbelts are fastened, tray tables are stowed, and seatbacks are in their upright positions. We will be landing at Miami International Airport in 15 minutes. A gentle wave of relief swept through the cabin. After hours of tension, passengers were eager to finally disembark. But for Elena, she knew this was far from over. Linda, seated in first class, remained stiff and visibly angry, her eyes darting repeatedly in Elena's direction. Elena wasn't surprised. After enduring a prolonged confrontation throughout the flight, she could feel that Linda wasn't the type to let things go so easily. She's definitely waiting for another opportunity to cause trouble, Elena thought, doing her best to stay composed. As the plane touched down safely, a light round of applause erupted from a few passengers. But Linda's expression didn't change. Her face was tense, and her gaze remained fixed on Elena. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, Linda sprang out of her seat. She didn't bother waiting her turn, instead pushing her way to the front of the cabin, blocking other passengers who were trying to retrieve their luggage. Excuse me, Mom, a polite man said as Linda cut in front of him. I have something important to deal with, Linda snapped, her voice sharp and high-pitched, not even glancing back. Elena stayed seated, her eyes following Linda as she marched straight to the front of the cabin, where a lead flight attendant was standing near the aircraft door. Waving her hand to get the flight attendant's attention, Linda's voice rang out loud and clear, enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. I need to speak to the captain right now. The lead flight attendant, maintaining her calm professionalism, replied, Ma'am, the captain is currently handling disembarkation procedures. If you have an issue that needs addressing, we will be happy to contact airport security for you. Linda crossed her arms, her voice cutting like a blade. I don't need to wait. You don't understand what's happening here. That woman, she pointed directly at Elena, making sure everyone in the cabin could see she is a danger. I've been warning you all flight, and you've ignored me. A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers, instead of leaving their seats, now paused to watch the unfolding scene. Elena stood up, retrieving her backpack from under the seat, ready to disembark. But as she stepped into the aisle, Linda pointed directly at her. There. That's her, Linda shouted, her voice echoing through the cabin. She's a threat. She's definitely hiding something. I demand that her luggage be searched immediately. Elena stopped in her tracks. Every eye in the cabin turned toward her, as if waiting to see how she would respond. Taking a deep breath, Elena turned to face Linda. This time, her voice was firm and unyielding. Ma'am, I've stayed silent long enough. I haven't done anything wrong. You have no right to criticize or humiliate me in front of everyone based on your prejudices. Linda's eyes widened, stunned that Elena had dared to push back. But she quickly regained her self-righteous demeanor. Who do you think you are? I don't care who you are, but I know you're hiding something. Do you really think you can fool me? As Linda continued her accusations, two airport security officers who had been called arrived in the cabin. Their expressions were serious as they approached Elena. Ma'am, one of them said, "We've received a report of suspicious behavior. Please come with us so we can resolve the matter." Elena, unfazed, nodded calmly. All right. But before we go, I think there's something you'll want to see first. She slowly placed her backpack on the ground, then reached into her jacket pocket, carefully pulling out her wallet. She flipped it open to reveal a gleaming FBI badge which caught the cabin lights and shone brightly. My name is Special Agent Elena Cruz with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If you need to verify, I'd be happy to assist. The cabin fell into complete silence. Linda, who had been yelling just moments earlier, now stood frozen in place. Her face turned pale and her wide eyes remained locked on the badge in Elena's hand. The two security officers exchanged glances, their posture immediately straightening. Their demeanor shifted entirely as they realized the situation. Agent Cruz, we deeply apologize for the misunderstanding, one of the security officers said, his tone awkward. We were just responding to a report. Elena offered a faint smile, her voice calm as she replied, It's all right. I understand you're just doing your job. She turned her gaze to Linda, her expression cold but composed, without a trace of anger. Ma'am, Elena said, her voice sharp and clear, you have judged me throughout this flight based solely on my appearance. Now that the truth is out, do you have anything you'd like to say? Linda, completely flustered, stammered. I didn't know. I didn't think it would turn out like this. Elena raised an eyebrow, her tone cutting through the silence like a blade. No, you didn't know. But that didn't stop you from humiliating me in front of everyone. You chose to judge instead of staying silent, and now you must face the consequences. The passengers, now understanding the full situation, began murmuring indignantly about Linda. Disapproving and critical glances were directed her way. The two security officers turned to Linda. Ma'am, please come with us so we can address your disruptive behavior during the flight. Linda, her face flushed with embarrassment, had nothing left to say. She lowered her head and quietly followed the officers off the plane, leaving Elena standing there, composed and resolute. Elena picked up her backpack and stepped into the aisle. A few passengers gave her quiet nods of acknowledgement, as if silently apologizing for Linda's behavior. She walked through the plane's door, leaving the tension behind her. For Elena, this was just another small challenge in a long day's work. But it was also a stark reminder that prejudice still exists and must be confronted. And she knew she had done the right thing, not just for herself, but for anyone who has ever been judged unfairly. Elena stepped off the Boeing 737, leaving the tense atmosphere of the cabin behind her. The bustling noise and chaos of Miami International Airport surrounded her, but for Elena it felt like a release. Still, she knew that the story wasn't entirely over, especially given everything that had just unfolded. Not far away, Linda Worthington sat slumped on a chair in the airport's security area, flanked by two security officers. She kept her head down, her hands clutching her expensive handbag tightly, with none of the arrogance or self-assurance she had displayed earlier. Passengers disembarking from the plane passed by Linda, some casting her looks of anger, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had witnessed during the flight. Linda felt their stares, and she wished she could disappear into the floor at that very moment. One of the security officers approached Linda, speaking in a firm tone. "Ma'am, you violated serious regulations regarding behavior on board a flight. We need you to sign this report and cooperate with us to resolve this matter." Linda looked up, her face flushed with embarrassment, but her voice came out soft and shaky, as if she were searching for some shred of sympathy. "I was just trying to protect everyone. I didn't mean for things to go this far." The security officer's expression remained neutral, his tone unwavering. "Ma'am, harassment and discriminatory behavior are never acceptable, no matter the justification." Linda didn't respond. Her hands trembled as she signed the report, fully aware that she had lost all semblance of control or authority in the situation. Meanwhile, in the baggage claim area, Elena stood quietly, waiting for her suitcase on the carousel. A few passengers from the flight began approaching her. The first to step forward was the young woman who had spoken up in Elena's defense during the flight. "Hi," she said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say that I really admire how you handled that situation. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that." Elena smiled softly and gave her a small nod. "Thank you. But honestly, this isn't the first time I've had to deal with something like this." The young woman shook her head, her expression full of frustration. "That's so upsetting. I can't believe people like her still exist. But at least you showed everyone the truth." A middle-aged man, the one who had sat near Linda on the flight, also approached, his voice tinged with guilt. "I want to apologize for not doing anything," he said. "I should have spoken up earlier, but I didn't want to get involved. Honestly, I feel ashamed." Elena looked at the man with a kind yet firm expression. "No one is obligated to confront people like her," she said. "But I hope that next time something like this happens, you won't hesitate to speak up. Sometimes, just one voice can make all the difference." The man nodded, his eyes showing a newfound determination. As Elena left the baggage claim area, her phone buzzed with a call from the Miami FBI office. The voice on the other end belonged to Supervisor Carlson, her direct superior. "Cruz, I just received a report from the airport. Sounds like you had an eventful flight." Elena let out a small, dry laugh. "It wasn't too bad, sir. But I think I managed to help someone realize that their prejudices can have consequences." Carlson paused for a moment, then spoke again, his tone more serious. "I know what you faced wasn't easy. But you handled it brilliantly. Your actions didn't just protect your own dignity, they also reflected the professionalism of our entire organization. I'm proud of you." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. Carlson's words were more than just recognition, they were a reminder of why she loved the work she did, even when it came with unexpected challenges. "Thank you, sir. I'll head to the office now to prepare for the meeting." As Elena left the airport to continue her work, Linda remained in the security area. After signing the report and being informed that she could face a ban from the airline's routes, Linda sat quietly, the arrogance completely gone from her face. A security officer approached her, his voice firm and direct. "Mrs. Worthington, this flight has been fully documented. We will be forwarding this case to the Aviation Authority for further review. You're free to go now, but please be aware that this behavior will have consequences." Linda didn't respond. She stood up, gathered her handbag, and walked away, the humiliation still etched on her face. Meanwhile, sitting in the back of a taxi leaving the airport, Elena leaned into the seat, savoring a rare moment of calm after a turbulent flight. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through a few messages from colleagues, most of them checking in to see how she was doing. One message, in particular, made her smile. "Word on the street is you handled a Karen on your flight. Legendary." Elena quickly typed back a reply. "Just another day at work." But deep down, Elena knew it wasn't just an ordinary day. What she had done wasn't just about defending herself, it was about sending a powerful message that truth and courage will always prevail over ignorance and prejudice. The taxi glided through the bustling streets of Miami, streetlights reflecting off the car's windows. Elena stared out at the vibrant cityscape, her thoughts still lingering on the incident that had unfolded on the flight. She reassured herself that she had done the right thing, keeping her composure, defending her dignity, and most importantly, not allowing Linda to drag her down to the level of such irrational prejudice. But now she had to push aside any lingering emotions and refocus on the bigger mission ahead. Miami wasn't just the destination at the end of a tense flight, it was the starting point for one of the most significant operations she had ever been a part of. The taxi came to a stop in front of the Miami field office of the FBI. The sleek, modern building, with its gleaming glass facade, stood out against the crowded downtown district. Elena stepped out, adjusted her jacket, and strode purposefully toward the entrance. At the reception desk, a young staff member looked up and immediately recognized her. Agent Cruz, Supervisor Carlson is waiting for you in conference room 3. Elena nodded and offered a polite smile. Thank you. She walked down the hallway, the steady click of her heels echoing against the marble floor. As she approached the door to the conference room, she paused, took a deep breath, and then pushed it open. Inside, Supervisor Carlson, a man in his 50s with a commanding presence and piercing eyes, stood beside a whiteboard covered in dense notes and diagrams. Surrounding him was a group of other agents, all poised and ready to begin the briefing. Carlson looked up as Elena entered and gave her a slight nod. Cruz, you're just on time. Take a seat, and we'll get started. Carlson gestured toward the whiteboard, where a complex web of names, photographs, and arrows connecting various points of interest had been laid out. This is why you're here, Cruz, Carlson began. We're dealing with the largest money laundering operation Miami has seen in the past decade, and you, with your experience investigating underground financial networks, are going to be a key player in taking this organization down. Elena nodded, her focus locking onto the board as Carlson continued his explanation. This operation is run by a man named Mateo Alvarez, Carlson said, pointing to a photograph of a sharp-dressed man with cold, calculating eyes. He's smart, meticulous, and discreet. He uses a network of legitimate businesses to launder dirty money sourced from drug trafficking, human smuggling, and other illegal activities. We've been monitoring him for 2 years now, but this time, we have the opportunity to take him down once and for all. Carlson's finger tapped firmly on Alvarez's photo, emphasizing the target. Mateo Alvarez's polished exterior belied the ruthless criminal empire he controlled, and his cold stare from the photograph seemed to challenge anyone daring enough to come after him. He's holding a secret meeting with his partners tomorrow at a luxury hotel on Miami Beach, Carlson said, pointing to a location on the map. Cruz, you'll go undercover as a financial investor to infiltrate and gather evidence. This is our only shot to bring him to justice. After the meeting, Carlson asked Elena to stay behind to discuss the finer details of her role in the mission. Cruz, I know you've just had a rough flight, Carlson began, but we need you at your absolute best. This mission isn't just dangerous, it demands absolute precision. Are you ready? Elena met Carlson's eyes directly, her voice steady and resolute. I'm always ready. Carlson nodded, clearly satisfied. Good. Here's the detailed profile of the persona you'll be taking on. We've prepared everything from forged documents to a fully functional fake bank account. Remember, under no circumstances can anyone know you're an FBI agent. Even the smallest mistake could put your life in danger. Elena took the file and flipped through its contents. Her alias Gabriela Ortiz, a financial investor from New York seeking new partnerships in Miami. She carefully studied every detail, committing the information to memory. A plan was already beginning to form in her mind. As she prepared to leave the office and head to her hotel, Elena received a text message from the FBI liaison at the airport. Linda Worthington has been temporarily banned from domestic flights. Her behavior report is being forwarded to the FAA for further action. Elena read the message and couldn't help but smirk slightly. Linda was finally facing real consequences for her actions, but Elena didn't dwell on it. Bigger things demanded her attention. A dangerous, high-stakes mission lay ahead. That night, in the hotel room arranged by the FBI, Elena sat alone by the large window overlooking Miami Beach. The soft glow of skyscrapers reflected on the water, creating a scene both beautiful and faintly unsettling. She held a glass of water in her hand, her thoughts fixed on the operation set for the next day. Mateo Alvarez, she murmured to herself, repeating the name as though preparing her mind for the confrontation. What had happened on the flight earlier, Linda's accusations, the judgmental stares of the other passengers felt like a test of her patience and resilience. But Elena knew the greatest challenge was still ahead. Setting her glass down, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. Tomorrow is my day, she said to herself, her voice quiet but firm. And this time, no one is going to stand in my way. The next morning, the vibrant sunlight of Miami flooded the streets. But inside the luxurious Solmar Hotel, the atmosphere wasn't as serene as its glamorous exterior suggested. This was where Mateo Alvarez, an international crime lord, was holding a secret meeting with his partners in his vast money laundering network. Elena stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room, performing one final check. Today, she was no longer FBI agent Elena Cruz. She was Gabriela Ortiz, a sharp financial investor from New York, looking for a major partnership opportunity in Miami. Her outfit had been chosen with precision: a sleek black sheath dress, sharp-pointed high heels, and a designer handbag, a counterfeit, but loaded with the tools she'd need for the mission. Her hair was swept into a neat bun, exposing her defined features and projecting confidence. Before leaving the room, she carefully checked the hidden microphone and camera embedded in her necklace one last time. Everything was functioning perfectly. "All right, Gabriella," she murmured to herself, meeting her own gaze in the mirror. "Make them believe you." Elena made her way down to the hotel's grand lobby, where the secret meeting would take place in a lavish second-floor conference room. She stopped briefly at the reception desk, where a middle-aged man, discreet and composed, waited for her. He was an undercover FBI operative, planted to assist her. The man gave her a small nod as she approached. "Ms. Ortiz?" he asked, following the script exactly. "Yes," Elena replied, her voice calm but polite. He handed her a fake name badge that read Gabriela Ortiz, financial investor. "Mateo and the others are already upstairs on the second floor. The meeting starts in 15 minutes. Good luck." Elena offered a slight smile, though her mind was fully focused on the task ahead. She turned toward the elevators, gripping her handbag firmly as if on instinct. The doors to the conference room swung open, revealing an opulent space bathed in soft lighting, with sleek glass tables and high-backed leather chairs. At the center of the room stood Mateo Alvarez, a faint smirk playing on his face as he shook hands with one of his associates. Mateo looked every bit the legitimate tycoon: a tailored designer suit, a gleaming Rolex on his wrist, and an air of self-assured confidence. But Elena knew that beneath that polished exterior was a cunning and ruthless mind. She stepped into the room, her high heels clicking against the marble floor with measured precision. Mateo's gaze shifted immediately to her. "Gabriela Ortiz," she introduced herself, extending a hand with a sharp, calculated smile. Mateo clasped her hand, his eyes scanning her with a subtle yet penetrating scrutiny. "Pleasure to meet you, Ortiz. I hear you're looking for investment opportunities in Miami." Elena nodded, her unwavering gaze meeting his. "That's correct, Mr. Alvarez. And I've been told you're the man to talk to about big opportunities." Mateo chuckled, a low, deliberate laugh laced with an undercurrent of something unspoken. "I like a woman who knows exactly what she wants." "Please, have a seat." Elena sat down, carefully placing her handbag on the table beside her. Meanwhile, Mateo's other associates began filing into the room one by one, each with their own distinct demeanor. Some exuded confidence, others appeared cautious, while a few opted to silently observe. The meeting commenced with brief introductions and formalities. Mateo took center stage, launching into a presentation about new investment opportunities, a thinly veiled explanation of his money laundering operations, executed through a web of seemingly legitimate businesses in Miami. Elena listened intently, nodding occasionally where appropriate, but her sharp eyes were constantly scanning for anything she could use as evidence against Mateo. The hidden camera in her necklace captured everything from the intricate charts and diagrams Mateo displayed to the hushed conversations he exchanged with his partners. It wasn't long, however, before Elena noticed Mateo's gaze lingering on her longer than necessary. His calculating eyes seemed to study her, as though he were attempting to determine exactly who she was and whether she could truly be trusted. "Ms. Ortiz," Mateo said, his tone laced with curiosity. "Who have you worked with in this field before? I'm curious about your experience." Elena smiled, maintaining her confident demeanor. She had prepared for this question. "I've worked with a few firms in New York," she said smoothly, "but I prefer to keep their names private. My partners value discretion." Mateo nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on her, unblinking and probing. "So do I," he replied. "I don't care for people who are too curious." Elena felt her pulse quicken, but she betrayed no sign of unease. "I couldn't agree more," she said evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "That's why I believe we'll work very well together." Mateo chuckled, but the sound was layered with subtle menace. The meeting continued, but Elena could feel that Mateo's trust in her was still tenuous. He wasn't fully convinced, and she could sense his wariness in every glance he sent her way. Just as she thought she might have navigated through his suspicions, one of his bodyguards, a towering man with a cold, expressionless face, stepped up to Matteo and whispered something into his ear. Matteo's demeanor changed instantly. His smirk faded, replaced by a sharp, calculating look. He turned toward Elena, his gaze suddenly icy and unyielding. Mess. Ortiz, he said, his voice slow and deliberate, with a dangerous edge. It seems we need to verify your identity a bit more thoroughly. Elena felt the weight of the room shift. The tension was palpable. The other partners at the table turned their eyes toward her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. The bodyguard stepped closer, his posture tense, clearly prepared to act if needed. Stay calm. Elena, she told herself. This is just a test. You can handle this. The atmosphere in the conference room suddenly grew tense. Mateo Alvarez, who had seemed polished and confident moments ago, now had a look of cold calculation in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlocked in front of him, his sharp gaze fixed intently on Elena. Miss Ortiz, he said, his voice low and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. I've always believed in being cautious when working with new people. You don't mind if we verify a little more about you, do you? Elena maintained her composed expression, though she was fully aware of the shift in the room. She offered a calm smile, her eyes steady and unwavering. Of course, Mr. Alvarez. I understand your need for caution. But I hope this isn't because you doubt me. Mateo smiled. But it was a smile filled with hidden menace. Not exactly, he said. But you know, in our line of work, trust isn't something that comes easily. And I'm not the kind of man who likes to gamble without being sure. With a subtle gesture, Mateo signaled to his bodyguard, a towering man with a stony expression. The guard stepped closer to Elena, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. Your bag, Ms. Ortiz. Elena felt the weight of every gaze in the room bearing down on her. She knew that refusing would only raise suspicion, but inside her bag was a backup recording device. If they found it, the mission would be over in an instant. She forced a light smile and extended the bag toward the guard. I have nothing to hide. Please, go ahead and check. The bodyguard took the bag and moved to a corner of the room to inspect it thoroughly. Elena sat upright, her hands resting lightly on the table but clenched just enough beneath it to betray her growing tension. She knew that if they discovered the device, she would have to act quickly. While the bodyguard rifled through her bag, Mateo's eyes never left Elena. He leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze seeming to cut straight through her. Ms. Ortiz, he said, his tone almost conversational, though laced with an underlying suspicion. You worked in New York, correct? I'm curious what made you choose Miami as your next investment destination. Elena smiled again, her mind quickly recalling the details from her fabricated profile. Miami is a market full of potential, Mr. Alvarez, she said smoothly. I've heard a lot about how you run things here. I thought it would be a great opportunity to learn from you and collaborate to expand possibilities. Mateo nodded. But his expression remained guarded. He was testing her, weighing each word she said with careful scrutiny. At that moment, the bodyguard returned and placed Elena's handbag on the table. Nothing suspicious, sir, the bodyguard reported in a calm voice. Elena silently exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. She knew the recording device was hidden in a secret compartment in the bag, and it was clear the bodyguard hadn't discovered it. Mateo narrowed his eyes slightly, but he said nothing. Ms. Ortiz, Mateo said, his tone suddenly shifting to something more congenial, almost warm. I have a proposal. Why don't we move this discussion somewhere more private? I have a small office upstairs where we can talk in greater detail about these investment opportunities. Elena immediately recognized the underlying intent behind his invitation. This wasn't a simple offer, it was another test, a way for him to isolate her and probe further without witnesses. She nodded, keeping her voice natural. I'd be delighted. I always prefer private conversations to better understand my partners. Mateo stood, gesturing for her to follow. One of his bodyguards trailed closely behind them, clearly ensuring she wouldn't have the chance to do anything out of the ordinary. Mateo's office was a small but lavishly decorated room. A glossy walnut desk sat in the center, and a small bar stocked with expensive liquors occupied one corner. He motioned for her to sit in a leather armchair, while he settled into the chair across from her. Ms. Ortiz, he began, his tone light but laced with subtle menace. I've always believed that a sustainable business relationship starts with honesty. Wouldn't you agree? Elena nodded, her expression unwavering. I couldn't agree more, she said. Matteo leaned forward, his sharp gaze piercing through her composure. Then be honest with me, he said, his voice low and deliberate. Who are you, really? Elena felt her body tense for the briefest of moments, but she quickly regained her calm. I'm not sure I understand your question, she replied, her tone measured and steady. Matteo let out a faint chuckle, but it was devoid of warmth. His smile carried a cold edge, more predatory than friendly. I've been in this business long enough to know when something doesn't feel right, Matteo said, his voice steady but filled with suspicion. You showed up at just the right moment, said all the right things. I don't believe in coincidences. Elena knew this was a test. This was the tipping point. If she didn't handle it well, everything would come crashing down. She leaned back in her chair, maintaining a relaxed posture while her gaze remained confident and unwavering. Mr. Alvarez, she began, her voice cool but still polite. You have every right to doubt anyone. That's why you've been so successful, isn't it? But if you truly think I'm not trustworthy, why did you invite me here in the first place? Matteo stayed silent, his sharp eyes studying her every movement. I'm here, Elena continued, her tone firm but measured, because I respect you and what you've built. If you don't trust me, I can leave right now. But I think you'd be passing up a great opportunity. She stood as if preparing to leave, her actions deliberate. Matteo stared at her for a long moment, then suddenly let out a laugh. You've got guts, Ortiz, he said, his tone calmer now. I like that. Sit down. Let's continue our discussion. Elena sat back down, silently exhaling in relief. She knew she had just crossed a dangerous line. Matteo still didn't fully trust her, and every move she made from now on would need to be executed with extreme caution. As their conversation continued, Matteo began to open up more. He shared additional details about his investment plans, which were, in reality, sophisticated money laundering schemes. Elena carefully absorbed every word, while the hidden camera in her necklace captured everything. But deep down, she knew Matteo was still watching her closely, scrutinizing her every gesture and word. This wasn't over, not even close. In truth, it was only the beginning. The sun was beginning to set, its golden light streaming through the tall windows of the Salmar Hotel, casting a scene that was both breathtaking and oppressive. The meeting in Matteo's office had stretched on for nearly 2 hours, and Elena knew she had gathered some incredibly incriminating evidence. The veiled comments, the intricately disguised money laundering schemes, and the subtle slips from his associates, all of it had been captured by the hidden camera in her necklace. But the danger was far from over. Matteo seemed more at ease with her presence, but Elena stayed on high alert. Beneath his calm demeanor, she could still see traces of suspicion in his eyes, like a predator biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elena was about to stand and make her exit when one of Matteo's bodyguards entered the office, holding a phone in his hand. The man leaned in close to Matteo and whispered something into his ear. Matteo listened, his expression shifting from relaxed to cold and menacing. He set his glass of whiskey down on the desk, his gaze darkening. Ms. Ortiz, Matteo said, his voice now low and dangerous. I've just received a very interesting call. It seems your identity doesn't entirely match what you've told me. Elena's heart raced, but she showed no outward reaction. She kept her face calm, her gaze steady. I'm not sure I understand what you mean, she replied, her voice soft but firm. Matteo leaned forward, the faint smile he had worn earlier completely gone. Don't play dumb, Ms. Cruz, or whatever your real name is, he said, his tone sharp and cutting. You thought I wouldn't have ways to check on you? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Elena felt a chill run through her veins. He knew. Matteo rose to his feet, gesturing for his 2 bodyguards to step closer. One of them pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at her. Now, Matteo said, his voice icy, tell me who you really are. FBI? CIA? Or just some idiot sent here to try and mess with my operation? Elena didn't have many options. She knew that if she didn't act quickly, she might not leave this room alive. She smiled faintly, her voice suddenly turning sharp and resolute. I'm the one who's going to take you down, Matteo. Before anyone could react, Elena spun around and flung the chair she was sitting on toward the guard holding the gun. The chair slammed into him, knocking him off balance. In one swift motion, Elena launched herself forward and struck the second guard with a hard elbow to the jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. Matteo stepped back, his face contorted with fury. Get her, he roared. Grabbing her bag, Elena darted out of the office. The hallway outside instantly became her battlefield. Another guard was standing by the door, ready to block her path, but Elena neutralized him with a precise spinning kick that sent him crashing into the wall. She sprinted down the hallway, the heavy thuds of Mateo's guards' footsteps echoing close behind her. She knew she needed to get out of the building before they could trap her. Elena pulled her phone from her bag and pressed the emergency contact button. A familiar voice came through the other end. "Agent Cruz, are you okay? The extraction team is ready." "I've been compromised," Elena panted. "Mateo knows who I am. I need immediate extraction. Meet me at the west exit." "Understood." "The vehicle is on its way." She dashed into the emergency stairwell, her high heels clattering against the metal steps, creating a loud echo. Realizing they were slowing her down, she yanked them off and tossed them aside, racing barefoot down the stairs. The sound of her pursuers' footsteps was growing louder. At the ground floor, Elena shoved open the emergency exit door, stepping into a narrow hallway that led to the back of the hotel. But just as she turned the corner, one of Mateo's guards appeared, his gun already aimed at her. Elena quickly dove behind a nearby pillar, taking cover just in time. "Come out now, or I'll shoot," the guard shouted, his voice booming in the confined space. Elena took a deep breath. From her bag, she pulled out a small canister of pepper spray, one of the essential tools she always carried with her. She counted down silently in her head: 3, 2, 1. Suddenly, Elena sprang out from behind the pillar, spraying the pepper spray directly into the guard's face. He screamed in pain, dropping his gun to the floor. She didn't give him a chance to recover, landing a swift punch to his jaw that knocked him out cold. Finally, she reached the hotel's west exit. A black, bulletproof SUV was waiting for her, its engine running. The back door swung open, and one of her FBI teammates inside waved her over. "Move it, Cruz," he shouted. Elena jumped into the vehicle just as the sharp crack of gunfire echoed behind her. Mateo's guards had caught up and were firing at the SUV, but the reinforced bulletproof windows held firm, unaffected by the shots. "Drive," Elena yelled. The SUV roared to life, tearing away from the hotel as the wailing sirens of approaching police cars filled the air. Elena leaned back in her seat, breathing heavily, her heart racing. Despite the chaos, a sense of relief washed over her. As the vehicle sped down a quiet side road, the screen of the SUV's communication system flickered to life. Supervisor Carlson's face appeared, his expression filled with concern. "Cruz, are you okay?" he asked, his voice tense. "I'm fine," Elena replied, her breath still slightly labored. "I got the entire meeting on record. We have everything we need to bring Mateo down." Carlson's face relaxed slightly, his features softening with a trace of approval. "Good work. But you know this isn't over. Mateo won't take this lying down. He's going to retaliate." Elena allowed herself a faint smile, her eyes glinting with determination. "Let him try," she said. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." In the luxurious penthouse on the top floor of the Sol Mar Hotel, Mateo Alvarez stood before the massive glass windows overlooking the Miami coastline. The city was cloaked in darkness, with only the bright lights of skyscrapers and bustling streets illuminating the night. Yet, in Mateo's eyes, there was no brilliance, only the simmering fire of rage. "She's FBI," Mateo muttered, his voice low and brimming with menace. One of his bodyguards stood nearby, rigid and avoiding direct eye contact with him. "We let her escape," Mateo continued, his piercing glare fixed on the guard's anxious face. "And what did she take? Our entire plan? It's all been recorded." The bodyguard bowed his head, his voice trembling as he spoke. "We did everything we could, Senor Alvarez. But she was quick." Mateo raised a hand, signaling for silence. Turning away, he moved to the sleek desk where a satellite phone lay waiting. Picking it up, he dialed a string of numbers swiftly, his jaw tight as he waited. A deep, gravelly voice answered from the other end. "Mateo." "We have a problem," Mateo said coldly. "An FBI agent just ruined my meeting. She stole the data proof of everything. I need your people to find her immediately." "What's her name?" the voice on the other end inquired. "Elena Cruz." At that very moment, Elena was at a temporary FBI safe house, set up in a discreet warehouse about a 20-minute drive from downtown Miami. The facility served as the team's operational hub after the mission at the hotel, where they worked to process evidence and strategize the next steps. Elena sat before a computer monitor, reviewing footage captured by the hidden camera in her necklace. The images and audio were crisp, showing Mateo Alvarez's face in vivid detail and capturing his deep, calculated voice as he outlined his money laundering network. Behind her, Supervisor Carlson stood, his sharp gaze locked on the screen as he analyzed the footage. "You did an excellent job, Cruz," he said. "This is critical evidence to indict Mateo and dismantle his entire network. We need to get this sent to the Washington field office immediately." Elena nodded, but she knew it wasn't as simple as Carlson made it sound. "Mateo won't let this go," she said, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "He'll retaliate. And I don't think we're completely safe yet." Carlson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "We anticipated this. The FBI will protect you." Elena gave him a faint smile, but deep down, she knew that if Mateo decided to strike back, things would become far more dangerous than anyone expected. Back at the Solmar Hotel, Mateo ended his call and turned to his bodyguard. "Find her," he ordered, his voice laced with menace. "I don't care what it takes, bribes, threats, even killing if necessary. But I want her captured before the FBI has a chance to use what she took." The bodyguard nodded, pulling out his phone to contact his team. Mateo walked to the bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. His cold, calculating eyes stared into the amber liquid as his thoughts fixated on Elena. "You dared to play with fire, Cruz," he muttered to himself. "Now you'll burn." That night, back at the FBI's temporary safe house, Elena sat in a small conference room, discussing the next steps with a colleague. She had no idea that outside the warehouse, a group of heavily armed men was closing in on the perimeter. One of the FBI agents on guard duty noticed something unusual. He grabbed his radio, his tone sharp with suspicion. "We've got movement on the north side. Doesn't look like civilians." But before he could say more, a barrage of gunfire erupted. The windows of the safe house shattered, sending shards of glass flying everywhere. "Attack!" someone shouted, and the base was immediately thrown into chaos. Elena dove under the table, instinctively pulling the handgun from her holster. She could hear the pounding footsteps of intruders outside, the crack of gunfire, and the shouted commands of other agents. "Cruz, over here," Supervisor Carlson yelled, motioning for her to run toward a nearby door that led to a safer, fortified area of the warehouse. Elena stayed low, dodging shards of shattered glass as she sprinted toward Carlson. She and Carlson, along with a small group of agents, retreated to the safe zone at the back of the warehouse. But they couldn't stay there for long. Mateo's team had completely surrounded the area. "We can't let them get the data," Elena said firmly, her voice resolute. "We need to get out of here now." Carlson nodded, quickly issuing the order to evacuate. Another agent had already prepared an armored truck waiting at the rear of the building. Elena clutched the USB drive containing the critical data, gripping it tightly as though it were her lifeline. "Protect that USB at all costs," Carlson told her, his tone unwavering. The team made a break for the rear exit, moving swiftly and covering each other as they went. But just as they reached the armored truck, a black SUV screeched around the corner, blocking their escape route. The vehicle's doors flung open, and a group of armed men stepped out, led by a tall, imposing figure, Mateo's right-hand man. "Hand over the data," the man demanded, raising his weapon and pointing it directly at Elena. Elena's gaze remained cold and steady, but her mind was racing, calculating their next move. Carlson stood beside her, his hand resting on the pistol holstered at his side, ready for a fight. "You're not getting out of here, Agent Cruz," the man sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Mateo sends his regards, and he wants what you stole from him." Elena took a step forward, holding the USB drive high in her hand. "If you want it," she said, her voice sharp and defiant, "then come and take it." The USB drive in Elena's hand glinted under the glow of a nearby streetlight. It wasn't just evidence against Mateo, it was the key to dismantling his entire money laundering empire. But right now, Elena and her FBI team were in a dire situation, surrounded by Mateo's men, with every escape route blocked. Mateo's right-hand man stepped forward, his gun aimed directly at Elena. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he sneered, his tone dripping with menace. "Hand over the USB, or we'll take not just your life but the lives of your teammates as well." Elena tightened her grip on the USB, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "If you want it, come and take it," she shot back, her voice brimming with defiance. At that moment, the man signaled his crew to charge. Before they could make a move, Carlson drew his gun and fired the first shot. The crack of gunfire echoed through the area, signaling the start of an intense shootout. Despite being outnumbered, the FBI team held their ground with courage and precision. Elena gradually moved toward the back, determined to protect the USB at all costs. Bullets whizzed past her, but she stayed focused, scanning for an opening to escape the encirclement. "Fall back," Carlson shouted, motioning for the team to retreat toward the armored truck. Elena fired back as she inched closer to the truck. But just as she was within reach, one of Mateo's men emerged from the shadows and grabbed her arm. They both tumbled to the ground, and the USB slipped from her grasp, skidding across the pavement. Elena wrestled with the man, using every ounce of her strength to break free from his iron grip. He tried to pin her down, but with years of training kicking in, she drove her elbow hard into his ribs, forcing him to loosen his hold. Rolling away from him, Elena's eyes darted around, searching desperately for the USB. It lay a few feet away, but the man had also spotted it. Both lunged for it at the same time. In a split-second decision, Elena snatched the USB first and sprang to her feet. She fired a shot at his leg, dropping him to the ground with a pained yell. "Never underestimate me," she said through gritted teeth before turning and sprinting toward the truck. The armored truck was ready to go, but before Elena could climb aboard, another black SUV screeched to a halt, blocking their path. The door swung open and Mateo stepped out, his face dark with fury. "You really think you're getting out of this so easily?" he said, his voice low and laced with deadly intent. Elena didn't flinch. She held up the USB, her gaze steady and resolute. "You've already lost, Mateo. Everything I need is right here," she said, shaking the USB. "In a few hours, this data will be in the hands of the entire FBI network. There's no escape for you now." Mateo let out a cold, bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You think you've won. You have no idea how this world works. Cut off one head, and another takes its place. I'm just a piece of the game." Elena stepped forward, standing face to face with Mateo. "Maybe," she said, her voice unwavering. "But tonight your game ends here." At that moment, the distant wail of police sirens filled the air. Mateo turned his head sharply, catching sight of the flashing lights rapidly approaching. "The FBI called for backup," Elena said, her tone calm but firm. "Your time is up." Mateo's jaw clenched as the reality of his situation dawned on him. There was no escape. Slowly he raised his hands in surrender, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't the end, Cruz," he hissed. "This is just the beginning." Within minutes, FBI agents and local police swarmed the scene, securing Mateo and his remaining men. One by one, they were handcuffed and escorted to waiting vehicles. Carlson approached Elena, his expression one of pride. "You did an outstanding job, Cruz," he said. "We've dismantled his entire operation." Elena nodded, but her face remained serious. She couldn't shake Mateo's parting words. He wasn't wrong, he was just one piece of a much larger criminal puzzle. But tonight at least she had struck a decisive blow. She glanced down at the USB in her hand, relief washing over her as she realized that all her risks and sacrifices had been worth it. "Make sure this evidence stays secure," she said firmly. "Mateo might be in custody, but the people backing him won't let this go so easily." Carlson gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll take care of it. And what about you? How about some rest for a change?" Elena allowed herself a faint smile. "I think I could use a full night's sleep, but tomorrow we keep moving forward." The next day, on a quiet beach in Miami, Elena sat on a lounge chair, gazing out at the horizon. The gentle waves lapped against the shore, bringing a temporary sense of peace. But she knew this calm was fleeting. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the stillness. She picked it up and saw a message from Carlson. "Mateo has been transferred to federal custody. We just received intel on a new organization. Ready." Elena stared at the text for a moment, then turned her eyes back to the ocean, a small smile playing on her lips. "Always ready," she replied. Rising from her chair, she took one last look at the endless blue expanse of the sea. The fight wasn't over, far from it, but Elena knew she wouldn't back down. As she walked away, her silhouette faded into the glow of the Miami sun. She was ready for whatever came next. Special Agent Elena Cruz's story is not just about fighting dangerous criminals, it's a journey of overcoming discrimination and prejudice. From enduring hateful words on the plane to facing danger in Mateo Alvarez's lair, she proved that courage, resilience, and belief in justice can overcome any challenge. While Mateo has been captured, the shadows of his criminal network remain. Elena's fight for justice is far from over, and she needs people like you to stand for truth and fairness. If you enjoyed this story and want to follow more thrilling adventures of Elena, hit subscribe to our channel and like this video to ensure you don't miss any updates. Your support is the driving force behind our mission to bring you even more exciting and meaningful stories.